I stared at the digital image of the marriage license attached to an email sent at 11:48 at night. Instead of heartbreak, a cold chill ran down my spine. The bride smiled perfectly, but I knew that face from an internal fraud training slide labeled, "Do not engage." My phone buzzed against the table. He was calling to hear me break, but I had just realized I was being set up as the fall guy. My name is Hannah Price, and at 37 years old, I sat alone in the silent expanse of my suburban home in Briar Hollow, Virginia. The air in the house felt stale, recycled, much like the arguments that had filled these walls for the last decade. It was the first night after the divorce decree had officially gone into effect. The silence should have been peaceful. Instead, it felt like the quiet before a structural collapse. The notification light on my phone pulsed once, cutting through the dark living room. It was an email. The timestamp read 11:48 at night. The sender was Caleb Rowe. The subject line contained a single word: proof. I did not want to open it. My thumb hovered over the screen, trembling slightly, not from sorrow, but from an exhaustion that went down to my marrow. I tapped the glass. An image loaded, pixel by pixel, revealing a photograph taken in low light. It was a marriage license, the paper still crisp, resting on a bar table next to 2 glasses of champagne. Next to Caleb's messy scrawl was a signature in elegant, practiced cursive Sloane Whitaker. My eyes drifted to the inset photo of the bride attached to the file. She was stunning, blonde, poised, with a smile that suggested she had never known a day of financial worry in her life. I zoomed in, my breath hitched, but not because I was jealous. I zoomed in further, ignoring the gloss of her lips, focusing on the structural details of her face. There was a subtle asymmetry in her left eye, a drooping of the lid that makeup tried to hide but could not erase. Below her chin, barely visible against the high resolution, was a faint, jagged scar shaped like a crescent moon. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. I had seen this face before. It was not in a social magazine or a friend's timeline. I had seen it 3 months ago in a windowless conference room at Orchard Gate MedTech Supply during a mandatory internal training session on vendor fraud. That face had been on a slide titled Synthetic Identities and High-Risk Profiles. Underneath her photo, in bold red letters, was the instruction, "Do not engage." My phone rang, shattering the silence. Caleb's name flashed on the screen. I answered, putting the phone to my ear without saying a word. "You saw it, didn't you?" Caleb's voice was thick, slurred with alcohol and arrogance. I told you I wouldn't be alone for long." I stared at the scar on the screen. "Caleb, she's perfect. Hannah, a dream. Truly a dream. Her family. God, the connections. They opened doors for me today that you couldn't even knock on in 10 years. He laughed, a wet, ugly sound. "She's the real deal, not like whatever small life we had." I felt a strange sensation, like ice water running through my veins. The grief I expected to feel was entirely absent, replaced by the sharp, cold clarity of an auditor spotting a discrepancy in a ledger. "Caleb," I said, my voice barely a whisper, steady and devoid of the anger he wanted to hear. "Are you sure you know who she is?" The line went dead silent. The breathing on the other end stopped. Then, the call disconnected. I lowered the phone and looked around the dark living room. Suddenly, the last month made terrifying sense. The divorce had been suspiciously smooth. Caleb had been aggressive about the timeline, pushing for a quick settlement. He had let me keep the house in Briar Hollow without a fight. He had waived his rights to my retirement. He had wanted out, and he had wanted out fast. I had thought it was guilt. I was wrong. It was not guilt. It was a deadline. He needed to be legally single to close this deal. This was not a romance. This was a transaction, and he was the one being acquired. I opened my laptop, the blue light illuminating my face. I created a new folder and labeled it with the current date. I saved the photo of the marriage license. I took a screenshot of the call log. If it is a fraud, it leaves a mark. I whispered to the empty room. I was not the grieving ex-wife anymore. I was an auditor, and I was about to conduct the most thorough investigation of my life. The glow of the laptop screen faded, but the image of that marriage license dragged me back in time. My mind replayed the tape of the last 3 weeks, seeking the moment the fracture had become a break. It started on the night of our 10th anniversary, which doubled as Caleb's 40th birthday. I had set the dining room table with the heavy linen napkins we had received as a wedding gift and never used. 2 tall candles burned in the center, dripping wax onto the silver holders. In the kitchen, a dry-aged ribeye, costing more than my weekly fuel budget, rested on the counter, waiting for the sear. I sat there for 3 hours. The wine breathed until it was dead. The silence in the house was not peaceful. It was heavy, pressing against my eardrums like deep water. Then my phone buzzed against the mahogany table. I picked it up, expecting an apology or a tragic excuse about a flat tire. Instead, I read 5 words. Urgent issue. Staying out tonight. There was no happy anniversary. There was no I am sorry. There was not even a love you. It was the kind of text you sent to a roommate you barely tolerated, not a wife of 10 years. The next morning, the unease in my gut turned into a sharp, cold stone. I called the real estate firm where Caleb worked as a senior broker. I kept my voice light, pretending I was just a wife trying to coordinate a surprise lunch. "Oh, Mrs. Rowe," the receptionist said, her voice dripping with confusion. "I thought you knew. Caleb resigned 4 days ago. He said he had a new opportunity." I hung up without saying goodbye. I drove home like a sleepwalker, the road blurring into gray ribbons. When I pulled into the driveway, his black sedan was there. The engine was cold. He had been home for hours while I was at work. I walked up the stairs, my hand gripping the banister so hard my knuckles turned white. The bedroom door was open. Caleb stood by the bed, 2 large suitcases open and waiting. They were not packed in a panic. They were organized. Shirts folded in perfect squares, shoes in dust bags. This was not a sudden departure. It was a rehearsed evacuation. He looked up when I entered. He did not flinch. He did not look guilty. He reached into his jacket pocket and tossed a thick manila envelope onto the duvet. It landed with a heavy slap. "It is a fair settlement," Caleb said. His voice was terrifyingly calm, like he was closing a deal on a duplex in the suburbs. "You keep the house. I take the liquid assets. You sign. And we are done." I looked at the envelope, then at him. "Caleb." "What is this?" He sighed, a sound of profound impatience. He walked over to the mirror and adjusted his collar. "I cannot do this anymore. Hannah." "Look at this," he said, gesturing vaguely at our bedroom, at me. "You are comfortable. You are safe, but you have a small life. You are happy counting pennies and watching reruns. I need elevation. I need to be with people who understand the level I am trying to reach." He turned to face me, his eyes cold and devoid of the warmth I had seen in them for a decade. He was rewriting our history in real time, casting me as the anchor that had held him back, rather than the foundation that had held him up. "You are mediocre, Hannah," he said, and the cruelty of it stole the air from my lungs. "You do not know how to play with the right people. You never did." I stood there, paralyzed. At the time, I thought I was witnessing a midlife crisis. I thought he was leaving because he had fallen out of love. But looking back now, I realized the truth was far more clinical. He did not leave because the love was gone. He left because he had finished preparing what he needed to take He was not escaping a bad marriage. He was graduating from it. He zipped the suitcases shut. The sound was like a zipper closing on a body bag. He grabbed the handles and walked past me without a backward glance. I listened as he descended the stairs. Thump, thump. The wheels hit each step with a rhythmic final beat. At that moment, I thought it was the sound of an ending. I did not know yet that it was actually the opening beat of a war. 2 days later, I sat in the office of Marisol Grant, a family law attorney who read documents with the same predatory precision that I applied to financial ledgers. We were not treating the divorce agreement as a settlement. We were treating it as a crime scene. Marisol tapped her pen against a paragraph on page 12, her eyes narrowing behind her glasses. "Hannah, look at Clause 4B, Marisol said, her voice tight. Standard language usually splits debt incurred during the marriage, but this says you accept full liability for all unsecured debt generated in the last 24 months, regardless of the originating party, provided the accounts are linked to a shared address." I leaned in, scanning the legal jargon. It was buried under benign sentences about property division. "He told me it was just standard boilerplate," I said, feeling the heat rise in my neck. "He said it was to protect his credit score for the new job." Marisol typed rapidly on her keyboard. "Let us pull your credit report right now. If he buried this clause, he is expecting to use it." The printer whirred, spitting out pages of data. Marisol snatched the first sheet, and her face went pale. She slid the paper toward me. "Hannah." "Have you opened a new credit line recently?" Marisol asked. I looked at the bold line at the top. A credit card had been opened 4 months ago using my Social Security number. The current balance was staggering $39,800. "I have never seen this card," I said, my voice steady despite the shock. "I use one card for groceries and gas. That is it." Marisol flipped to the digital signature log attached to the electronic filing of the divorce papers. "He submitted an addendum 2 weeks ago acknowledging this debt. It has your digital signature right here. Date stamped at 2 in the afternoon on the 14th. I stared at the timestamp. That is impossible. On the 14th at 2 o'clock, I was in a dental chair getting a crown replaced. I was under anesthesia. I could not have signed anything. Then it is forgery, Marisol said, slamming the folder shut. And this debt isn't accidental. It is theft. I left her office with a plan. I did not go home to cry. I went home to work. I froze every credit line I had. I changed every password to a randomized string of characters. Then, I downloaded 24 months of bank statements and opened a spreadsheet. I filtered the data, looking for the bleed. It was not one big withdrawal. It was a slow death by 1,000 cuts. A withdrawal for $500 here labeled consulting, $300 there for office supplies, expensive dinners listed as client development. When I summed the column, the total was enough to put a down payment on a house. He had been draining us dry while I was clipping coupons. My eyes fell on the corner of the room where Caleb had left his old laptop. He had claimed the fan was broken and the processor was fried, so he had bought a new one before leaving. I walked over and plugged it in. The fan screamed like a dying engine, but the screen flickered to life. I stared at the login prompt. Caleb was arrogant, and arrogance made people sloppy. I typed in the variation of the password he had used for our Netflix account. Access granted. I did not look at his emails. I went straight to the browser cache and the temporary files. An auditor knows that people delete history, but they rarely clear the cache. The history was a roadmap of his betrayal, but it was not filled with romantic getaways or jewelry stores. It was purely logistical. SW Notary Appointments, SW LLC Filing Requirements, Nevada, SW Offshore Banking Transfer Limits. He was not dating Sloan Whitaker. He was managing a project. I clicked on a folder labeled Temp Key deep in the system drive. There was a single PDF file, a scanned passport. I opened it. The face staring back at me was the same woman from the marriage license. The same asymmetry in the eye, the same scar under the chin. But the name next to the photo was not Sloan Whitaker. The name on the passport was Riley Vance. I sat back in my chair, the screaming of the laptop fan fading into the background. He does not know, I whispered to myself. He thinks he married an heiress named Sloan, but he is in bed with a ghost. I arranged the digital files side by side on my screen. On the left was Sloan Whitaker, the blushing bride. On the right was the passport scan for Riley Vance. They were identical. The same hairline, the same chin, the same asymmetry. Then I found a third image in a subfolder, a grainy ID card with different hair and glasses. But the facial landmarks aligned perfectly. I closed my eyes and saw the training room at Orchard Gate again. The slide on synthetic identities had warned us about this. Vendor fraud rings often used recycled faces with fresh data sets to bypass automated checks. This woman was not real. She was a composite. I did not scream. I opened a fresh spreadsheet. I started logging evidence with the cold detachment of a forensic accountant. Fill names, hash values, timestamps, and chain of custody. I needed to prove not just what they did, but when they did it. Digging deeper into the email archives, I found a thread labeled SW Instructions. The tone was jarring. There were no heart emojis or terms of endearment. It was purely transactional. Do not use personal funds. One email read, "Wrote everything through the shell. Keep your hands clean until the structure is solid." Caleb was not the mastermind. He was taking orders. He was the interface, the charming face used to sign the papers while someone else pulled the strings. Then a thought struck me, colder than the rest. If Caleb was the mule, what was I thought back to 10 months ago? Caleb had come into the kitchen, looking harried, asking to scan my driver's license for a new car insurance quote. I had handed it to him without looking up from my book. I remembered the specific sound of the scanner humming in his office. I pulled up the scanned image of my license found in his temp folder. I zoomed in on the background. The license was resting on our oak coffee table. Just to the left of the laminate edge was a faint, white ring, a water stain from a glass I had forgotten to put on a coaster the night before. He had not been getting insurance quotes. He had been harvesting my identity. He had been planning to use my clean record as a shield for his dirty work almost a year before he asked for a divorce. I picked up the phone and dialed Marisol. "This is not a divorce anymore," I said, my voice vibrating with controlled rage. "This is interstate identity theft." I could hear Marisol shifting in her chair on the other end. "Then we are done playing nice," she said. "I am opening a criminal file. We are going to bury them." I needed to be seen, and I needed to be seen standing tall, to the outside world. I was the discarded first wife, the woman left behind for a younger, wealthier model. If I hid, I confirmed that narrative. So, 3 days later, I drove to Port Mason for the Women in Risk Networking Gala. I wore my sharpest blazer and held a glass of sparkling water like a weapon. I was not there to socialize. I was there to build an alliance. I found Rena Alvarez near the bar. We had gone to university together before she became the most feared investigative journalist in the tri-state area. She looked tired, her eyes scanning the room with the cynical detachment of someone who knew exactly how many people in the room were indictable. "Hannah Price," Rena said, not smiling, but her voice was warm. "I heard about the divorce. I assume you are not here to discuss the emotional toll of separation." "I am here because I found something," I said, keeping my voice low. Rena took a sip of her drink. "Funny. I was going to call you. I am tracking a network of shell companies moving through the county registry. High-volume transactions, zero physical footprint. I saw a familiar name on a filing this morning." She paused, looking at me over the rim of her glass. "Caleb Rowe? He is listed as a senior consultant for a firm that does not have a street address." My phone buzzed in my clutch. It was Caleb. He was predictable in his cruelty. I opened the message. It was a photo of a sleek, modern building rising out of a desert landscape. New HQ, just named General Manager. The view from the top is different when you are with people who actually own things. I showed the screen to Rena. He thinks he is a tycoon. He thinks he married into a dynasty. Rena scoffed. A dynasty with a P. Oh, box in a strip mall. Who is the girl I swiped to the photo of the bride? Her name is supposedly Sloane Whitaker, but her face has a history. I looked Rena in the eye. Run the face, not the name. Please. Rena set her glass down and pulled out her tablet. She was fast. She bypassed the standard search engines and went straight to the deeper databases she paid subscription fees for. She cropped the face from the photo I sent her and ran the algorithm. We stood in silence for 2 minutes, the chatter of the gala fading into white noise. Here we go, Rena said, her voice dropping an octave. Sloane Whitaker. Social Security number issued 2 years ago. Credit score is a perfect 800. No high school records. No university degree. No employment history prior to 24 months ago. She did not exist before 2 years ago. I said, the pieces locking into place. She is a synthetic identity, Rena confirmed, tapping the screen. She is a ghost built to pass a credit check. She is not a person, Hannah. She is a product. Someone built her to open doors that require a clean name. My phone buzzed again. Caleb was spiraling. He must have sensed my silence was not defeat, but something else. Don't try to ruin my happiness. Hannah, they protect their own. You are out of your league. It was the first time he sounded scared. He was not bragging anymore. He was trying to convince himself that he was safe. He was just a mule, a carrier for a virus he did not understand, and he was threatening the only person who actually saw the infection. I looked at Rena. He thinks he is the player. He is just the board. I typed a reply, my fingers steady. I did not engage with his threat. I did not mention the fraud. I simply planted a seed of doubt that I knew would grow in the cracked soil of his insecurity. Enjoy the house. Hope the foundation holds. I put the phone away. Rena nodded at me. A silent agreement passed between us. We were not just catching up. We were hunting. I returned to the Orchard Gate offices after hours, when the cleaning crews were vacuuming the carpets and the motion sensor lights flickered in the empty corridors. I did not turn on the overhead lights in my cubicle. The glow from my dual monitors was enough. I had credentials that Caleb never knew about. Access levels reserved for senior auditors investigating internal threats. I navigated to the restricted database, the one containing the Do Not Trade list and the flagged vendor registry. I typed in the keywords Whitaker, Vance, and Foundation. The system thought for a moment before spitting out a result. The Whitaker Foundation sounded noble, the kind of entity that funded pediatric wings in hospitals. But when I cross-referenced the billing address, it did not lead to a glass office tower. It mapped to a mailbox rental service in a rundown strip mall next to a vape shop. My secure email pinged. It was Rena. She had attached a zipped folder containing civil court records from Florida. Read page 4. She had written in the body of the email. I opened the file. It was a lawsuit for misrepresentation involving a luxury condo rental. The defendant was a woman named Riley Vance. The photo attached to the ID was unmistakably the woman Caleb had just married. She had different hair, darker, shorter, and wore thick-rimmed glasses, but the facial structure was identical. The case had been dismissed because Riley Vance had simply vanished into thin air. Then came the second file from Rena, this one from the Nevada Secretary of State. A new limited liability company had been formed just 5 days ago, Red Crown Medical Leasing LLC. The manager listed was Caleb Rowe. My stomach turned over, but I forced myself to scroll down to the financing section. A company like that needed a guarantor, someone with a long credit history and assets to back the initial loans for expensive medical equipment. Caleb had neither. I looked at the line for personal guarantor. It read Hannah Price. Next to it was my Social Security number. Next to that was a digital signature that looked like mine, but had a slight tremor in the loop of the P that I never made. I clicked on the supporting documents. There was a high-resolution scan of my driver's license. I stared at the image, and a memory from 10 months ago hit me with the force of a physical blow. I was in the kitchen, cooking dinner. Caleb had come in, holding his phone, looking stressed about a car insurance renewal. He had asked to borrow my license to scan it for the agent because he claimed the scanner in his home office was acting up. I had handed it to him without looking away from the stove. In the scan on my screen now, visible only because I was looking for it, was the background of the surface where the license had been placed. It was our old oak coffee table, and right next to the edge of the license was a faint, circular water stain, a ring left by a cold glass without a coaster. He was planning this, I whispered to the empty office, my voice shaking. 10 months ago. He was harvesting me. I understood the game immediately. Red Crown was a bust-out scheme. They would use my credit to lease millions of dollars in medical equipment, inflate the invoices, secure loans against the assets, cash out, and then disappear. When the dust settled, the creditors would not look for the shell company. They would look for the guarantor. They would come for me. I dialed Marisol. It was late, but she answered on the first ring. "Tell me you did not confront him," Marisol said instantly. "I didn't," I said, gripping the phone. "It is worse than we thought. I am the guarantor for a leasing scam in Nevada. He stole my ID 10 months ago. If I scream now, they will shred everything and run. I need them to think the line is secure." "We need a silver bullet," Marisol said, her lawyer voice sharp and cold. "We need a time-stamped action that links them directly to the fraud while you are verifiably somewhere else." "I know," I said. "I am setting a trap." I opened the internal monitoring system for Orchard Gate. I set a passive alert for the keyword Red Crown. If that name appeared anywhere in our invoicing system, I would know. I sat back and waited. 20 minutes later, a red banner flashed across my screen. Alert, new vendor application submitted. Entity Red Crown Medical Leasing LLC, Origin IP Redstone, Nevada. They were submitting a fraudulent invoice to my own company, testing the waters, using the very credentials they stole from me. It was exactly the pattern from the training slide. "Got you," I said. And for the first time in weeks, I smiled. "You just walked right into the kill zone." The trap was set, but Caleb was the one who decided to spring it. My phone vibrated against the granite countertop of my kitchen island. It was a text from him. Casual and breezy, as if he had not just threatened me the day before. "Hey, need a quick signature on a waiver for an old investment account from before the split. Just formalities to clear the books. Sending the PDF now. Please sign and scan back ASAP." I forwarded the message immediately to Marisol. She called me 30 seconds later. "Do not sign it," Marisol said, her voice low and tight. "But do not refuse, either. If you say no, he might panic and scrub the trail. We need him to think you are just incompetent." "Tactical silence," I said, understanding the play. "I am just the ex-wife who cannot work a scanner." I waited an hour before replying. I kept my tone helpful, practically apologetic. "My printer is out of ink. Can it wait until tomorrow morning? I will do it at the office." The response was immediate. 3 dots bubbled on the screen, vanished, and reappeared rapidly. "Unbelievable! You are doing this on purpose. Just go to a store. I need this filed by close of business today." His desperation was leaking through the screen. "A legitimate investment waiver does not have a deadline measured in minutes." He was under pressure. "He is sweating," Marisol said when I read her the texts. "Let us see how desperate he really is. I am going to call the escrow company listed on that LLC filing in Nevada. I will tell them I am reviewing the document before you sign." I stayed on the line as Marisol dialed the number for Desert Valley Escrow. She put it on speaker. "Good afternoon," Marisol said, her voice transforming into professional honey. "This is Marisol Grant, legal counsel for Ms. Hannah Price. We are reviewing the waiver request for the Red Crown file, and I just wanted to clarify a clause before my client signs." There was a pause on the other end, followed by the clicking of a keyboard. "I am confused," Ms. Grant, the escrow officer said, sounding genuinely perplexed. The file is complete. We received the signed waiver from Ms. Price last night. Marisol froze. I stopped breathing. Is that so? Marisol asked, her voice dropping to a dangerous chill. Could you forward me the executed copy for our records? There seems to be a miscommunication on our end. Certainly. Sending it now. The email arrived with a ping that sounded like a gunshot in the quiet office. Marisol opened the attachment on her screen, and I opened it on mine. There it was. My name, signed at the bottom of the page. But the signature was wrong. It was too vertical, the loops too tight. It looked like someone had tried to trace my signature from memory and their hand had shaken. He forged it, I whispered. He could not wait for me to stall, so he signed it himself to close the deal. Look at the bottom left, Marisol commanded. Look at the notary stamp. I scrolled down. Below the forged signature was an official notary seal from the state of Nevada. The text read, subscribed and sworn to before me, in person, this 26th day of December, in Clark County, Nevada. I looked up at the calendar on my wall. Yesterday was the 26th. I was at work yesterday. I said, a smile slowly forming on my lips. It was not a happy smile. It was the smile of a hunter who just watched the prey step into the snare. I have badge logs showing I entered the Orchard Gate secure server room at 8:15 in the morning. I have a credit card receipt for a bagel in the company cafeteria at noon. I have traffic camera footage of my car on the Beltway at 6 in the evening. I was 3,000 miles away from Clark County, Nevada, at the exact moment this notary claimed I was standing in front of him. He did not just commit forgery, Marisol said, leaning back in her chair. He procured a fraudulent notarization. That implies conspiracy. He just turned a civil dispute into a felony indictment. I looked at the shaky signature again. Caleb had always been impatient. He always wanted the shortcut. He thought he was closing a deal that would make him rich. He had no idea he had just signed his own confession. He just nailed himself to the wall with a rubber stamp, I said quietly. And he does not even know he is bleeding yet. Redstone, Nevada, was a mirage of glass and steel erected in the middle of a scorched desert. It was a place where money went to be laundered into reputation. Rena and I walked into the ballroom of the Grand Meridian Hotel, the air conditioning cold enough to prickle the skin. Rena wore her press credentials like a shield, and I walked beside her, dressed in a black gown that cost more than my first car, looking nothing like the woman Caleb thought he had left behind in Virginia. The room was filled with people who smelled of old money and new desperate ambition. In the center of it all stood Caleb. He looked like the king of a kingdom he did not own. He was wearing a tuxedo that fit him perfectly, a glass of amber liquid in his hand, laughing at a joke made by a man who likely owned half the city. He looked happy. He looked successful. It was the best performance of his life. Then he saw me. The color drained from his face, replaced instantly by a flush of anger. He excused himself from his circle and marched toward me, his jaw set tight. He was not coming to greet me. He was coming to contain a spill. "Hannah," he hissed, his voice low but carrying enough venom to poison the air. "What the hell are you doing here? This is pathetic." "Did you follow me? Are you that obsessed?" He raised his volume slightly. Enough for the nearby guests to hear. "I told you, Hannah, it is over. You cannot just show up at my wife's foundation because you are lonely." I looked at him calmly. "I am not lonely, Caleb. I am just interested in the arts." Before he could answer, a hand rested on his shoulder. Sloane Whitaker or Riley Vance, or whatever name she was wearing tonight, stepped out from behind him. Up close, the asymmetry in her eye was invisible under professional makeup, but the scar under her chin was there, hidden beneath a layer of foundation. She extended a hand. Her skin was freezing. "So," she said, her voice smooth, like polished stone. "This is the Hannah I have heard so much about. Caleb said you were in accounting. That must be terribly dry." I took her hand. I did not squeeze. I just held it a second too long. "I do not just do accounting," I said, looking directly into her eyes. "I specialize in reconciliation. I look for things that do not match. I look for the gaps where the money disappears." Sloane's smile did not waver, but her eyelids fluttered. A tiny, involuntary spasm. "Everyone needs a hobby," she said dismissively, trying to pull her hand away. "It is more of a passion," I continued, lowering my voice. "Like how some people enjoy collecting vintage cars, or how others enjoy renting luxury condos in Florida under names that do not exist." The muscle in her jaw jumped. The smile stayed. But the eyes went dead. She knew that I knew. She stepped closer, invading my personal space, trying to intimidate me with her proximity. "You should be careful. Hannah, you are a long way from home. The desert can be unforgiving to tourists who get lost." She leaned in to whisper, her confidence making her careless. "Go home, Pricey P. This league is not for you." I froze. My blood ran cold, then hot. Pricey P. I took a step back, breaking the proximity. I looked at Caleb, who was watching us with a confused, smug expression, thinking his new wife was putting me in my place. Then I looked back at Sloane. "That is an interesting nickname," I said, my voice loud enough for Caleb to hear clearly. "Just a pet name," Sloane said, her eyes darting to the side. "No," I said, shaking my head. "That is not a pet name. Pricey P is my username on the OrchardGate internal server. It is the login ID I use to access the fraud database. Caleb never knew that name. He never asked about my work." I let the silence hang there for a second, heavy and suffocating. "The only way you would know that name," I said, delivering the strike, "is if you studied my file. Specifically the one Caleb stole for you." Sloane's face cracked. It was a micro-expression of pure, unadulterated fear. She looked at Caleb, then back at me, realizing she had just handed me the smoking gun. Caleb frowned, looking at his dream woman. "What is she talking about? How do you know her login?" Sloane opened her mouth, but no sound came out. "Enjoy the party," I said. "I have seen enough." I turned and walked away, the sound of my heels clicking against the marble floor. I did not look back, but I could feel Caleb's gaze burning into my back, and for the first time, I knew he was not looking at me with pity. He was looking at his wife with a question he was terrified to ask. The morning after the gala, my phone became a weapon of harassment. Caleb did not just call once. He called 17 times before 9 in the morning. When I did not answer, the text messages started coming in, shifting rapidly from aggression to desperation. The final message was a screenshot of a bank balance followed by a bribe. "I will wire $50,000 to your account today. Just withdraw the request for the notary logs. We can call it a settlement, please. Hannah." I did not reply. I took a screenshot of the text, logged the time, and uploaded it to the encrypted drive Marisol and I were sharing. $50,000 was a lot of money, but it was nothing compared to the prison time he was trying to buy his way out of. An hour later, an email arrived from a law firm in Nevada. It was a cease and desist order, printed on heavy, intimidating letterhead, accusing me of defamation, harassment, and corporate espionage. It demanded I destroy all materials related to Red Crown immediately. It was a scare tactic, a paper tiger meant to make a suburban housewife tremble. I forwarded it to Marisol with a note that said, "File this under intimidation." But the real attack came at 11 o'clock. The HR director of OrchardGate called me into her office. She was not smiling. Sitting next to her was the head of legal and the chief information officer. "Hannah," the director said, sliding a printed email across the desk. "We received a whistleblower complaint this morning. It alleges that you are using your administrative access to query the fraud database for personal vendettas and to blackmail a competitor. This is a termination-level offense. I looked at the email. It was anonymous, written in corporate speak, but the tone was frantic. I did access the database, I said calmly, looking at the head of legal, but I did not do it to blackmail anyone. I did it because I identified a vendor attempting to defraud this company. I pulled out my folder. I laid out the invoice from Red Crown Medical Leasing. This vendor submitted an invoice yesterday. I explained, my voice steady. I flagged it because the guarantor on the application is me. My identity was stolen to create this account. The person who filed this complaint against me is not a whistleblower. They are the fraudster trying to cut off my access before I catch them. I turned to the chief information officer. Check the IP address of the sender of that complaint. I guarantee you it does not come from inside the building. The CIO typed on his laptop. The room was silent for a long minute. The email originated from a guest network. The CIO said, frowning, "It traces back to the Grand Meridian Hotel in Redstone, Nevada." The head of legal closed his folder. The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. I was no longer the suspect. I was the witness. "They are attacking our employee to cover a fraudulent submission," the lawyer said. "This is now a hostile external act." By noon, OrchardGate had converted me from a liability into a protected asset. They filed an internal incident report confirming that the attack on my credibility was linked to the fraudulent vendor. They had just handed me a shield of corporate credibility that I would wear into court. I went back to my desk and opened the old laptop one more time. I needed to understand the hierarchy. I found an email chain from 6 months ago between Sloan and Caleb. I had read it before, but now I read it with new eyes. "Do not use your credit for the initial setup," Sloan had written. "We need a clean guarantor. Keep your name off the liability side." Caleb thought he was a partner. He thought he was the CEO of their new life. He was wrong. He was a mule. She was using him to carry the risk, and she was using me to carry the debt. When the house of cards collapsed, she would be Riley Vance again, vanishing into the wind, while Caleb and I were left handcuffed to the wreckage. My phone rang at midnight. It was Caleb. I answered this time. She says it is just a misunderstanding," Caleb said. His voice was cracked, wet with tears and alcohol. "She says she only borrowed your credit for a few weeks because hers is tied up in trusts. She loves me, Hannah. She wouldn't do this to me." He was begging me to validate his delusion. He wanted me to tell him he was not a fool. "Caleb," I said, my voice devoid of pity. "She is not borrowing it. She is stealing it." No. He sobbed, the sound pathetic and broken. "We are a team. You are just jealous. You want to ruin us." I hung up. I realized then that I could not go to the press yet. If I published the story now, Sloan would see it and run. She would leave Caleb holding the bag and disappear before the hearing. I needed her in that courtroom. I called Marisol. "Do not leak the story." I said, "Not yet. Let them think they have scared me into silence. I need them to walk into that hearing thinking they have won. I need to get them under oath." "We are going to let them perjure themselves," Marisol said, understanding immediately. "Exactly," I replied. "I do not want to just stop them. I want to catch them." The courtroom in Port Mason did not smell like justice. It smelled of floor wax and stale coffee. I did not walk in wearing the mournful black of a grieving ex-wife. I wore a tailored navy blazer and carried a leather portfolio. I was not there to cry. I was there to present a report. Marisol Grant wasted no time. She connected her tablet to the courtroom display and projected the waiver Caleb had forged. "Your Honor," Marisol said, her voice cutting through the room like a laser. "This document bears a notary seal claiming my client appeared in person in Clark County, Nevada, on December 26th. She swiped the screen. A new image appeared, a digital log from the security system at Orchard Gate. This is the badge access log for Hannah Price. Marisol continued. It shows she clocked into her office in Virginia at 8:15 in the morning on December 26th. Here is a credit card transaction for a bagel at the company cafeteria at 12:30. Unless my client has discovered the physics of teleportation, the document filed by Mr. Kai Rowe is a felony forgery. The judge turned his gaze toward Caleb. Caleb stood up, his face flushed a deep, unhealthy red. Your Honor, it was just a misunderstanding, Caleb stammered, wringing his hands. It was just a formality to speed things up. I was going to... Forgery is not a formality. Mr. Rowe, the judge interrupted, his voice dropping an octave. Sit down. Marisol moved to the next slide. It was the formation document for Red Crown Medical Leasing LLC. We have here a loan application guaranteed by Hannah Price. Marisol said, attached is a scan of her driver's license. Please note the background. There is a distinct circular water stain on the wood. She overlaid a photo taken from the listing of our marital home. The stain on the coffee table matched perfectly. The metadata on this upload comes from a laptop registered to Caleb Rowe, Marisol said. He did not just divorce his wife. He harvested her identity to secure fraudulent loans. Then, Marisol called Sloane to the stand. Sloane walked up, looking annoyed rather than afraid. She smoothed her skirt and sat down. Please state your legal name for the record, Marisol said. Sloane Whitaker, she replied, her chin high. Marisol picked up a piece of paper. Strange. Because according to a fingerprint match from a dismissed rental dispute in Florida, your name is Riley Vance. Sloane's composure cracked. Her eyes darted around the room. The Whitaker Foundation, Marisol continued, relentless, is a shell company registered in the Caymans with no assets, no board, and no charitable activity. You are not an heiress. Ms. Vance, you are the face of a bust-out scheme. Marisol delivered the final blow. She projected an email chain onto the screen. It was the conversation I had found on the old laptop. Sloane, do not use your credit. Use a clean guarantor. Caleb confirmed. Uploading Hannah's info now. A collective gasp went through the gallery. It was not just evidence. It was a written confession of conspiracy. He admitted to the crime in writing, Marisol said, closing her folder. There is nothing left to debate. The judge looked at the screen, then at the defendants. He pounded his gavel. The sound was loud, final, and satisfying. The divorce settlement is hereby vacated. The judge ruled all assets associated with Mr. Rowe and Ms. Whitaker are frozen effective immediately. I am referring this matter to the district attorney for charges of identity theft, wire fraud, forgery, and perjury. Bailiffs, do not let them leave. Caleb turned to Sloane, his eyes wide with panic. Sloane, baby, tell them you can fix this. Sloane did not look at him. She sat frozen, staring at the exit sign, her face a mask of cold calculation. She was trying to figure out how to run, but the doors were already guarded. She had played the game, and she had lost. Caleb was finally seeing her clearly, not as a dream, but as the nightmare he had invited in. I stood up and walked out of the courtroom. The sun outside was bright, blindingly clean. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I looked at the screen. It was Caleb calling. I pressed the side button and silenced the call. I did not need to answer. I did not need to scream. I do not take revenge with a shout, I thought as I walked toward my car. I take revenge with evidence. And finally, the ledger is balanced. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from, so please leave a comment below sharing your location and your thoughts on Hannah's revenge. Don't forget to subscribe to the Victoria Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and if you really enjoyed it, hit that hype button to help this story reach even more people.